Good morning, everyone. We're set to begin. We have a quorum. We have all 5 members on, so we're going to start. Good morning. This March 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Estimates continues to meet virtually. At this time, I'll call on our Comptroller, Bill Henry, for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions to today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no changes or corrections to the agenda. The board has received the following protests. On page 77, items number 1 and 2, Department of Public Works, WC 1241R, water main replacements on Asquith Street and Old York Road vicinity and transfer of funds. A protest was received from Wright Constable and Skeen LLP on behalf of Civil Construction LLC. On pages 77 and 78, items number 3 and 4, Department of Public Works WC 1285, Caroline Street and vicinity water main replacement and transfer of funds. A protest was received from Metra Industries. On page 181, items number 1 and 2, Department of Public Works WC 1252, Grantley Road and vicinity, water main replacement and transfer of funds. A protest and a supplement to protest were received from Metra Industries. A response to the protest was received from Monumental Paving and Excavating. On page 181, 182, items number 3 and 4, Department of Public Works WC 1410, Urgent Need Water Infrastructure Rehabilitation and Improvements Phase 1, FY21 and transfer funds. A protest and supplements to protest were received from Metra Industries. A protest was received from R.E. Harrington Plumbing and Heating Company. And on page 183, Department of Finance Master Services Agreement, a protest and supplement to protest were received from Kudik Rock LLP on behalf of ACI Payments Incorporated. A response to protest was received from DLA Piper on behalf of Paymentus Corporation. A reply to the response to protest was received from Kudik Rock LLP on behalf of ACI Payments Incorporated. There are no deferrals or withdrawals on the agenda. The following items are being moved to non-routine. Page 77, item number 1 and 2, Department of Public Works, WC 1241R, water main replacements on Asquith Street and Old York Road vicinity and transfer of funds. Pages 77 to 78, items number 3 and 4, Department of Public Works, WC 1285, Caroline Street and vicinity, water main replacement and transfer of funds. Page 181, items number 1 and 2, Department of Public Works, WC 1252, Grantley Road and vicinity, water main replacement and transfer of funds. Pages 181 to 182, items number 3 and 4, Department of Public Works, WC 1410, Urgent Need Water Infrastructure Rehabilitation and Improvements, Phase 1, FY21 and transfer of funds. And page 183, Department of Finance Master Services Agreement. There are no items being moved to the routine agenda. The following abstentions have been received by the board. Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott will be abstaining on page 173, Health Department, Agreement with Johns Hopkins University. Honorable President Nick Mosby will be abstaining on pages 48, Office of the City Council Bill 21-0183. Page 178, Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City, Memorandum of Understanding with Baltimore Civic Fund Incorporated. And page 179, retroactive travel approval reimbursement. Director of Public Works, Jason Mitchell, will be abstaining on pages 107 and 108, items number 24 and 25, personnel matters, Environmental Control Board. There are no other abstentions, no votes, and no rejection of recommended awards. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to approve and adopt the opening statement as read by the Comptroller.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This motion is approved. The opening statement and the motion is approved. At this point, I now direct the board's attention to a memorandum from my office dated February 28th, 2022, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items, together with any corrections or additions or abstentions and no votes that have been noted by the comptroller. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve all items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda has now been adopted. Our first item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 77, number 1 and number 2. Department of Public Works, WC 1241R, water main replacements on Asquith Street and Old York Road vicinity. A protest was received by Wright Constable and Skeen LLP on behalf of Civil Construction LLC. On behalf of the Department of Public Works, we have Deputy General Counsel Janine Maxwell to speak on this contract. Ms. Maxwell, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. City Council President, Mayor Scott, Comptroller Henry, Solicitor Shea, and Director Mitchell, honorable members of the council. This matter, Mr. City Council President, concerns state-approved, funding and for this project to go forward. This is out of the hands of DPW and the city, for that matter. If I could defer to Matt Garbark to add more details about this, the Deputy Director of DPW.
That's fine. Deputy Director Garbark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. I'm Matt Garbark, Deputy Director for the Department of Public Works. As Ms. Maxwell said, this is a water contract that deals with water main replacements on Asquith Street and in the Old York Road vicinity. 7 bids were received. The lowest responsive and responsible bid was Monumental Paving and Excavating, which is what the department is recommending the board award the contract to. The issue at hand is one dealing with the MBE and WBE goals and compliance review. Since we are using state revolving funds, the state program is what determines the compliance, not our MBU office or anything in the city. So we do have a letter that we have received from the state saying that Monumental Paving is in compliance with the state goals and that they are also the lowest bid. So they are deemed responsive and responsible, and we are proposing award to Monumental Paving and Excavating.
Thank you, Mr. Garbark. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board for DPW? Hearing, seeing none, and just to make sure we're on the same page, what I was able to gather from what you said, Deputy Director, is that Monumental is in compliance with the state requirements or goals. However, that's not consistent with the city, which is more strenuous than the state. Is that accurate?
They're 2 different programs. The state determines it separately, and the city does not weigh in on those programs. So they're 2 separately run programs. Yes, sir.
Understood. But again, I guess Monumental is not compliance with what the state requirements are. Is that accurate? Is that what you just communicated?
They are in compliance. Yes, sir.
They are in compliance with the state,
Correct. Yes.
not with the city.
City does not review. So the city defers to the state for review of the state goals. So the state determines compliance in that when state revolving funds are used.
Thank you for clearing that up for us. At this point, we're going to go, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board for DPW? Hearing and seeing none, we're going to go to the protester listed. So I guess the representative from Wright Constable and Scheme LLP, are you available to speak at this moment?
Thank you, President Mosby. Board of Estimates, my name is Lou Kozlakowski. I represent civil construction. First, not to pick on words, but what was just said was that Monumental is in compliance with the goals, and that wasn't the basis for our protest. There's no question that Monumental met the percentages, but in this case, under the state program, it's a 2-step process. First process is meeting the goals. The second process is showing your good faith efforts. And in that regard, Monumental did not indicate any good faith efforts. And attached to my protest was in fact an addendum from a different city program, different project, where the city postponed bid opening to make sure that bidders had the proper 30 days window to advise MBEs about bidding on that project. So what's happening is your grant from the state of Maryland doesn't care about percentages in overall. What they look for is percentages, and if the percentages fail, then they look to see whether or not there's been good faith effort of bidders to incorporate minority businesses as a whole. That is spreading out the advertisement. And that's what our protest is based on, that it fails to meet the second step of the MBE requirements. And I didn't hear whether or not, and it sounds like what the state looked at only, and possibly that was the way the question was posed to the state, was yes, they meet the percentages, but the question is, do they meet the second step, the good faith effort? And they failed down in that area by not complying with basically items A2 through A5 about advertising in minority local regional papers. Second, invitation for bids for DBE trade associations. They didn't contact MDOT, those sorts of agencies. They didn't receive a bidders list from the loan recipient. They didn't make any good faith effort. Yes, they got the result, but under the procurement, they're supposed to do two parts: results plus the effort, because the efforts go on later on to bring in other minority businesses that didn't get the award under that particular procurement. And that's the basis for our protest. Thank you.
No, thank you. At this time, are there any questions or concerns to the protester? Hearing and seeing none from the board, I see the hand of Timothy Wolf. Was that inadvertently, or who are you here to represent, Mr. Wolf?
DPW, when, if
Oh,
asked a question, but.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wolf. Yeah, I'll turn it over to you if you can respond for us. Sorry about that.
I was just gonna say, just to add clarity, and then maybe Matt had already clarified this, but we have received a letter from MDE from stating that we acknowledge the application of 6 good faith efforts on this federally financially assisted project. That was in a letter from MDE sent to DPW. So Matt, I don't know if you expanded on that or not, or maybe you were speaking to that. I just wanted to make that comment, that was in the letter.
No, I think that's an important point, Mr. Wolf. Thank you for bringing that to the board's attention. Deputy Director Garbach, do you have anything else to add at this point?
No, sir. That was just the point that Mr. Wolf just made, that the state has acknowledged 6 good faith efforts, and the letter explicitly says that the contract may be awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, Monumental Paving and Excavating, and it is signed by the Capital Program Contract Division Chief for the Maryland Department of the Environment. So the department stands by its recommendation.
No, thank you for that. Are there any questions or concerns from members of the board, to DPW, to protesters? Not seeing any. Finally, if Monumental would like to speak on behalf of this item, I'm not sure if they have a representative, but want to provide them an opportunity to speak since they're involved. Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion at this point.
I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item has been approved. Thank you to the protesters and all for joining on that particular item. The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 77 through 78, number 3 and number 4, Department of Public Works, WC 1285 Caroline Street and vicinity water main replacements. A protest has been received from Metro Industries. On behalf of the Department of Public Works, we have Acting Deputy General Counsel, Ms. Janine Maxwell, to speak on this contract. Ms. Maxwell, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. City Council President. Again, I am joined by Mr. Timothy Wolf, who's the chief, of the Office of Engineering and Construction with DPW. This contract, water contract 1285, bids for this contract were open or due on January 23rd of 2021. It is a contract in which Metra was the lowest bidder with the highest number of high-low bid items, meaning a number of unbalanced bids of all of the 8 bidders on the contract. Bid items did not reflect reasonable and actual costs that would inform DPW of Metra's anticipated profit, overhead costs, and other indirect costs that in total should reflect their ability to perform the bid item and perform the contract work. Upon review by DPW that took into account a number of factors, including an evaluation by a third-party consultant, which you will hear has occurred on the other 2 contracts that are on the agenda today. But DPW recommended that the contract be awarded to the second lowest bidder as it deemed that bidder represented a better overall value and savings to the city. Now, this water contract, it involves water main rehabilitation work. That type of work in a city like Baltimore, that is old. That means it has old piping, old infrastructure, things like that. And unknown emergency repairs and water main breaks, pipeline breaks they are expected, they're anticipated to occur. And recommending Metra, given the number of high and low bid items, would expose the city to financial risk and certainly did not give DPW a reason to believe that it would be safe to award this contract to Metra. I want to explain just a moment about unbalanced bidding. Unbalanced bids simply means 2 things, 2 components of that. On the one side, for the bid to be mathematically unbalanced, that simply means that there are prices that are significantly less than the cost of some contract items and significantly more than other contract items. Another way to think about this is to think about it in terms of the city specifications and standards, which I'm sure many of you know is commonly referred to as the Green Book, which does set forth the standard by which bids should be submitted. They need to be balanced. They need to be responsive. They need to reflect the contract work. In conjunction with the Green Book, the contract specs for this contract 1285 and the others you'll hear about on today's agenda is to think about it as the bid price must reflect a number of elements or a number of things, including materials, labor, equipment, overhead, and profit costs. That bid item that is submitted on bid documents needs to reflect and take into account all of those things. When that does not happen, the bid is mathematically unbalanced. Again, we're looking for prices that are significantly less on some contract items and significantly higher on others. The next prong, if you will, is to think about whether or not the bid is materially unbalanced. That would mean it's mathematically unbalanced and the city has a reasonable doubt that this particular bid will lead to the lowest overall cost to the city, meaning the best value for the city. And materially unbalanced bids are unresponsive bids. Unresponsive bids are to be rejected. They may be rejected at the board's sole discretion, according to the Green Book. The responsiveness of a bid is determined not now, not in the middle somewhere. It's determined on the bid document. That price is what the city takes into account to determine whether or not that price can conceivably factor in materials, labor, equipment, overhead, and profit. It needs to convince DPW that the work can be performed at that price. Responsiveness is not to be determined after a bidder has the benefit of knowing what the competitors bid also, after the prices and bids are opened. That's not the time for it to be considered. To then try to, once you enjoy that advantage, for Metra to now come and try to justify or explain why its bid should be considered responsive in the first place. When that happens, if that is allowed, I should say, then the city is at a disadvantage and will not be able to fairly compare all of the competitors in order to make a decision about what is the best value for the city, who can complete this work on this project. The greatest concern is that if the city is exposed to this financial risk, it ultimately trickles down to the city ratepayers for them to pay for cost overruns and change orders and requests for more quantities of certain items in the contract. This is exactly what the board is attempting to mitigate and what DPW is focused on preventing. We want fair, accurate, balanced bids in order to determine who is best to do the work for the city under the contract. I'm going to stop right there.
Thank you, Deputy General Counsel Janine Maxwell. That was an excellent, very detailed explanation of a lot of things that we talk about on this board on a regular basis. I look forward to seeing you come join us more often. I don't know if we've seen you much over the past year, but Director Mitchell, thank you for inviting Ms. Maxwell today. To the folks on the bridge, to members of the board, are there any questions or concerns based off what Ms. Maxwell was able to provide to us? Hearing and seeing none. Again, thank you, Madam Deputy General Counsel. We're going to move on to the protests. First up we have, from a protest perspective, is Metra Industries. Is someone on for Metra?
Yes.
All right, I think there might be a couple folks on. Could you, who's on for Metra real quick?
Stephen Diaslaki from Metro Industries is on, and our attorney, William Grosscup, who I believe his microphone is muted because I see him speaking, but I don't hear a word that he's saying, is also on the meeting.
Okay, would you like to go first, Stephen?
Yep.
Or you want to try to wait a second for the attorney to speak first, or it's up to you?
I just want to see if he's working, his microphone.
That's totally okay. What's his name?
William Grosscup, and he's putting on his headset right now, and we do not hear him. Bill, we don't hear you. If you have...
It appears that he's not connected to audio because it doesn't have on mute.
I should be unmuted now. Can you hear me now?
You're good. Yeah, we hear you now, Bill. We hear you now.
Okay.
The floor is yours, Bill.
Excellent. Thank you, President Mosby. I apologize for the slight.
No apology needed.
I appreciate that. And I thank Ms. Maxwell for her comments and her clarifications. To clarify from Metra's perspective for the members of the board, this is the first of 3 different contracts that that are at issue today for Metra. I've been doing this for a lot of years. I've never recalled an instance where we had even one instance where Metra was the low bidder on a contract, and then we had to protest the award that had gone to Metra. We don't just have one of those instances here, Chairman Mosby, the mayor, and members of the board. We're actually submitted 3 bids where we're the low bidder, and we're 0 for 3. As the board can well appreciate, there's an enormous amount of effort on behalf of Metra that goes into submitting these bids. Tens of thousands of dollars are put into this exercise. And what I'm hearing, and I understood Ms. Maxwell to say, and I think this is important. What she said is that there was in what she viewed as an inordinately high number of instances where Metra's bid items were higher or lower than the other bidders. It's interesting. Metra has been, I guess the best word is imploring. We have been imploring the DPW. We've been pushing we've been calling everybody we know. We've been writing every email we can think to write to get a copy of this determination that a contract where we appeared as low bidder by 6 months ago, and that we've been holding bonding capacity on for this amount of time. We have crews that were committed to the city of Baltimore that were ready to go on this work that we saw as low bidder. It was clear that it was ours. And it gets put on the agenda for the first time, I believe, last Friday. We're never told why. We're never told why, even though we won, we lost. And that the award instead is going to civil. The very first time Metra is hearing about any of the issues that Ms. Maxwell raised was 4 minutes ago. This board and this administration has talked a great deal, run on the idea of transparency in the government process. Here, what we see is a situation in which how is Metra supposed to defend itself from these allegations? They're nothing more than we're higher on some bid items and lower on other ones, and provide this board with the best information possible to make it an informed determination on that issue without actually receiving a copy of that determination that we've literally been begging for the last month. Now, you may recall Chairman Mosby at the last, or President Mosby, excuse me, at the February 16th meeting, there were some comments made about you about this administration striving for transparency. And we believe from Metra's standpoint, that's really the heart of the issue for us as it relates to all three of the bid protested issue. Ms. Maxwell raised two different standards that it relates to the fact that Metra was the low bidder, but then they can look beyond that under a very discrete, confined set of circumstances. And let me review those for the board, because I think that one of them was given some very short shrift. She said inappropriately that if Metra is the low bidder, you can move away from that, but only if you have two criteria have to be met. Not one criteria have to be met, but two. The first one is that the city determines that the bid is mathematically and materially unbalanced. As we sit here today, we don't know what that criteria is, other than that somebody in some sort of black box decision-making that the contractor never has access to, the public never sees, that somebody has determined that because some of Metra's bid items are higher on some items and lower on another, which is always going to be the case, that's enough to have your bid declared satisfactory of the first prong. And then she goes on, and there was slight mention of this, but never any finding that as relates to the first item, that the bid is materially unbalanced, that because of that imbalance on this emergency contract, for which we don't know what the total number of units necessarily ultimately going to be, because of that imbalance in the bid, it's likely that Metra's bid will not actually be the lowest cost to the city. Okay, if you don't meet that standard, then this board is duty bound to award the contract to Metra. So I don't know whether the board has a copy of that decision, that conclusion by not Ms. Maxwell, but somebody that worked for the board or by some sort of independent contractor. But here's the thing. Why the secrecy? Why the lack of transparency? In an NFL football game, the ref throws a flag and they move the team back by 10 yards, and the referee comes on the field and he says, holding on number 72 offense. And then they show a replay of it. And in this instance, however, nobody ever comes on and tells us anything until we're literally sitting before the members of this board deciding where contracts that are like the lifeblood of my client, where those contracts are going. Nobody ever tells us anything. Why this lack of transparency? I don't understand when Ms. Maxwell says that there could be harm done to the public if Metra is able to get its hands on this bid and defend itself. And here's why I don't understand that. When you're not low bidder, you're given access to all of the awards. You can go and make copies of the proposals, not the awards, excuse me, of the solicitation by the other offers. You can look at those so that you can make a bid protest. You can actually look at each of them. So if we are to be provided with information that allows us to defend itself, us to defend ourselves, where is the harm in that? Why not keep with the process where the contract goes to the low bidder, and if there is some legitimate concern, if Ms. Maxwell has one, why not lift the shroud of secrecy, expose that to the light of day in terms of what the concern is with regard to the imbalance, so that Metra can address that with this board in an intelligent fashion and not finding out about it literally 30 seconds before they start talking about what the concerns are. We've called everyone. We wrote the letter on February 17th to the comptroller, begging, literally begging for a copy of the decision. And it went on deaf ears, and then it pops up on Friday on the agenda. So there's people in the public that are listening to this. There's perhaps members of the press that are listening to this. Is this transparency? Is this letting a contractor defend itself when it's the low bidder? It had three, if think about us being up to bat, we had three clear singles out in the field where we got on base, we won the award, or we were the lowest responsive bidder. And in every single one of those instances, we're told we're out. But never once are we ever told why. So I would submit to this board that we would ask for, at a minimum, that the determination as to the award of this contract be deferred until such time as Metric can see what are the reasons why you're doing this. You say that our prices are high or low. How much high or too low? Because I can tell this board that on February 16th, there were 3 different contracts, okay, that were up for award. Metra dropped out and didn't submit a proposal in response to any of them. You know why? Because we don't know the rules anymore. We don't understand how this could have happened. We don't understand what the difference is in terms of when it's going to be too high, when it's going to be too low. And if Metra drops out, how many more Metros have to drop out before prices go up for the city? Because it's not just happening to us, it's happening to other contractors as well. So I would submit to this board that we lift the shroud of secrecy. It's a beautiful day outside today. It's never too late or the wrong day to do the right thing. And here, from our perspective, to the mayor and the members of the board and the Board of Estimates, for which we thank you, and to whom the public trust is given, we ask that the shroud of secrecy be lifted and we not find out 30 seconds before we're to speak as to what the basis of an important contract that one of the 3 together represents 30% of our revenues. What are we supposed to say to our employees? That this is just totally arbitrary and can be taken away because a number is higher here or lower there? Lift the shroud of secrecy. Let us see the information. Let us get back to the board in writing so we can respond to these issues. It's fundamental fairness and due process. So I ask that we be given some time to look at what's been said, to look at what those findings are that we've been begging for the last month, and so that we can give the public what it deserves. What it deserves is the lowest possible price by a responsive bidder. We're not asking for different rules. We just want to understand the rules of the game, because if you don't understand the rules of the game, it's the members of the public that are on this call that are going to be damaged. It's not about Metra, it's about the public. And we're going down a dangerous route here where a contractor, because some of its numbers are higher than somebody else's and somebody else's are lower, which is always going to be the case, in some backroom deal, it gets tossed out, and you never know why. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grosskopf. Just for the general knowledge of the way we operate the board for the general public, as well as members who join us today, typically when we have a protester, I'll allow the first person who's responsible to speak in first for the protester to provide all the points that they would like to provide and speak, basically as long as they would like to speak. Subsequent to that, if there's other supportive information about other members of the same team or that protester, we typically put a time limit on that. So I just want to be very clear that I think, Bill, Mr. Grosskopf was able to lay out several different points and argument associated with the protester. And there might be other individuals that would like to speak on behalf of it from Metra. And I will provide that opportunity, but it will not be a unlimited amount of time. And again, that's how we've always done it since, I've taken over running the Board of Estimates. With that said, from the administration side, DPW, are there any points of rebuttal or information you would like to provide to the board as it relates to some of the information that Metra just provided to the board?
I would, Mr. City Council President, but I believe General Counsel had his hand up.
Mr. General Counsel, the floor is yours.
Good morning, members of the board, Mr. Mayor, Mr. City Council President, and Mr. Comptroller. My comments specifically to the comments of Mr. Grosskopf's statement about transparency. His statements are factually disingenuous. On January 19th, Michael Mullen, one of the attorneys in the law department, actually had a detailed discussion with Mr. Grosskopf regarding this issue. In addition, on January 20th, Mr. Grosskopf responded to Michael Mullen the myriad points. One, saying that they acknowledged that Metro had an opportunity to go to the Board of Estimates to review the other bidders' unit pricing and failed to do so. They failed to avail themselves of that because they believed they were the lowest bidder, Metro's responsibility. In addition, Mr. Mullen also informed them that they had an opportunity because they failed to obtain the bidders' unit prices. They also had an opportunity to do an MPIA request. And again, Metro declined to do so. I then follow up with Mr. Grosskopf personally in a phone call because he was making assertions about transparency. And again, I reiterated to Mr. Grosskopf their responsibility in this procurement process, bidding process. Mr. Grosskopf specifically told me that they regretfully and negligently failed to obtain the other bidders to compare and contrast their bids. In addition, he specifically indicated that he did not want to submit a request for documents to review in anticipation of this Board of Estimates hearing. And this discussion with Mr. Grosskopf was in early February. So Mr. Grosskopf had ample opportunity and time from January 19th until now to receive documents through an MPIA request, which Metro failed to do so. In addition, notwithstanding the obligation of DPW to respond to Metro's document request, because the government, well, the staff and employees of the government have a responsibility to keep government information privileged until a decision is made. What DPW does is provide a recommendation to this board to ultimately make a decision. Any information that is obtained and analyzed and discussed are privileged under the executive privilege so that this Board of Estimate can make a well, intelligent, bound decision. Notwithstanding, myself personally, Attorney Michael Mullen, Mr. Wolf also availed themselves to Metro to let them know of their role and responsibility in this. And also, we heard from Metro about their position. And this is not the first day or short period of time that Metro is aware of this. Back on January 20th, Mr. Grossup's email indicated that they were aware of this position recommendation that their bids are unbalanced. So they had ample opportunity between January 19th until now to obtain information from the comptroller's office, but they failed to do so, in addition to seeking an MPI request. So the statements that Mr. Grosskopf is making is definitely disingenuous, and I want to bring this information to the board for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. General Counsel. At this point, before we move on to any other members of the protester, did want to provide Mr. Grosskopf an opportunity to respond. Just if you could, it appeared through your testimony, Mr. Grosskopf, that you reached out sometime in mid-February and did not receive any response. However, I guess some of the communication between yourself and the city that General Counsel Ingram was just able to communicate to this board was not factored in that testimony. Just a quick question for you. Do you remember those discussions between yourself and the city? Were they accurate?
I vividly remember those discussions with the city, and no, they are not accurate.
Okay, if you could just briefly kind of go over, I guess, your concerns associated with what has been presented before us today. Sure,
and I think that in fairness to Mr. Ingram, he does have roughly the date, the correct date range. As this board may recall, these bids were originally slated to be put on the BOE's agenda on February 2nd, 2022, and in late January, which is maybe about 8 days or so, 8 or 9 days before those were scheduled to be heard by this board, Metro was candidly in a state of panic upon learning that three of the contractors that were going to comprise 30% of its revenue for the year were about to be pulled out from under them, like Lucy going to kick the ball, or Charlie Brown going to kick the ball, and we're spinning through the air. So we did reach out to literally everybody we could think of to try to get our hands on a copy of those documents, which is
yeah, I think that's not, Mr. Grosskopf, just to be clear, and we want to try to move this along. I think, and I heard you in your original testimony provide all that same information.
Yeah, and
I think, hold on, if you could wait 1 second. I think the question is, with communication of the city, was there a process in which the law department or someone in DPW told you the appropriate way to receive the information in which you were requesting through an MPIA request?
Yeah, so what happened on that with regard to my conversation with Mr. Ingram is that took some time to get set up, but when we did finally get it set up, we had asked for copies of the determination so that we could defend ourselves. I had a conversation with Mr. Ingram, and that conversation was, I think, about 4 days before the board was set to hear those matters, and he suggested that I go through the MPIA process. And knowing that the MPIA process is not one in which we would have obtained that information in time to be able to have any meaningful input, we wouldn't have received it before this hearing that was originally set for the 4th. So I pleaded that we obtain that information so we could get it, knowing what the procedures and protocols are with the Maryland Public Information Act, that we would not receive those information in time. And in fact, we've been told by other members of the DPW that our request counted as a request under the DPIA, or excuse me, the MPIA. And then nonetheless, we have gone ahead and submitted requests under the MPIA so that we could obtain the documentation, just in case somebody made this type of argument that we should have requested it. But
well, thank you, Mr. Grosskopf. I think I understand, I guess, your concern. I think that it was important for you to probably work through that process. And if the hearing was to take place on the 4th, it's not that you would have received it by then, but you would have the ability to kind of communicate that. But I appreciate, and I think I hear your perspective and where you've come from. So I think that there's other members of Metro that would also like to speak up. I want to be very fair to ensure that all points from your perspective are brought out to the board today. So with that said, I believe there's other hands that's representing of the protester. I believe Stephen Dalaslaki.
Yes.
Dalaslaki.
Yes. Close
Give me
enough.
right.
Diaslaki.
Diaslaki. All right, there we go. Mr. Stephen Diaslaki, I believe you are representative of Metro. At this point, I'll give you the opportunity to speak. If you could keep your comments under 3 minutes, the board will appreciate that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Quick clarification, Ms. Maxwell said that the bids were opened on January 23rd, 2021. That is not correct. They were opened on June 23rd, 2021, 9 months ago. We had so much faith in the fact that our bid was the responsive low bid that we actually issued a purchase order for the pipe to lock in the prices. And I'm saying that not because we just took the initiative for ourselves, but also for the benefit of the city. There's over $750,000 worth of pipe material required for this job alone, which is subject to have doubled since we have placed that purchase order. If you don't award the Metro and you award to Civil, they may perhaps seek the added cost for that cost increase. In addition, Civil is $200,000 more expensive than us from the start. So that's $1 million more that you'd have to overcome. Now, the most important thing is Bill Grosscup has been begging for the analysis that brought the board to their conclusion that our bid was unbalanced. We never got that analysis. One thing we did get was we got the bid units for the bidders. I don't know how we got them, but we have the bid units for all of the bidders. I have them side by side with one another. There's not one single item, one single bid unit out of the 50 bid items that our units are out of whack or out of balance compared to any of the other ones. Certainly not at its face value, but we could demonstrate to you, certainly not based on cost either, which is the more important thing. We can go through every single item and show you why our bid unit is the way it is, and that it's not unbalanced looking at it that way, nor is it unbalanced compared to the other bidders. So that just does not exist. And most importantly, because we had the bid units from the others and our own bid units, and we've done a tremendous amount of work with the bid, we can demonstrate to you that we are the ultimate lowest responsive and responsible bidder, where our price will ultimately be that, not based on the contract quantities, but rather based on the quantities that we will actually construct for the city. Another important clarification I'd like to make was Mr. Grosscup represented that this is approximately 30% of our annual revenue. I wish it was only 30%. It's closer to 100% of our annual revenue when you combine the 3 jobs together. We've been working for the city harmoniously for over 2 decades. We are at a critically low amount of work right now. We are fully committed to the city. We work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the city, freeing up frozen water lines and providing potable water for the residents out there, and employing countless city citizens. We're at a point right now where we're so low in work that we're not asking for something for nothing here. We're asking for something that rightfully belongs to us, and we're asking if we can demonstrate that to you. We haven't been given that opportunity to demonstrate that, and if you could give us that opportunity, we can show you that our bid is the lowest responsive and responsible bid, and that our bid will ultimately be the lowest cost to the city regardless.
Thank you, Mr. Diaslaki, for that presentation and providing that background information. Truly appreciate that. Are there any other members from Metro that would like to speak? I'll give anyone else another minute to speak on behalf of Metro. Hearing and seeing none, I do see the hand raised. Of Mr. Kozlowski. Did I get that right? Come on, tell me if I'm butchering it.
Close, it's Kozlakowski.
Well, this is not horseshoes. Come on. So, all right, there we go.
That's quite all right.
So are you, just before you start, you here representing who?
Civil.
You're here representing Civil.
And I can be brief.
Yeah.
thought-
Hold on. 1 second. Yeah, before you speak, I'm gonna go back to DPW, the administration, make sure there's any other questions or concerns before we move on to you. At this point, are there?
Mr. President?
Is that Deputy Garbark? Yeah, Deputy Garbark, the floor is yours.
Yes, I just wanted to make one thing very clear, is that DPW is not awarding these contracts. We are recommending award to the Board of Estimates. So all the matters that we are deliberating are considered deliberative in nature, DPW believes that the appropriate place to protest awards and to discuss this information is actually at this meeting. So,
Understood. And I appreciate
DPW's
that clarification.
Yes,
Yep,
sir.
that's right on board. I appreciate that, Deputy Director. Are there any other questions for members of from the board? At this point, Mr. Kozlowski, I will provide the opportunity for you to speak.
Thank you very much. I'm putting on an old hat from a prior life. Ms. Maxwell did articulate the reasons for a materially unbalanced bid. The first is, of course, is you look at the four corners of the bid and looking to see whether or not the bid is, quote, unbalanced. All one has to do is look at the prices from other bidders. That's what shows you whether or not the bid is, quote, unbalanced. The second step, as Ms. Maxwell articulated, is then whether or not the bid is materially unbalanced. That is, if the quantities change, would the outcome of who the low bidder is would also change. And that, I believe, is what the city is saying, that when you look at the bids of Metra and then the quantities, that based upon the history, that someone other than Metra would be the low bidder if you look at the quantities that are probably going to be encountered in the field. I got this yesterday. I just played with it by knocking out contingent items. If I knock out contingent items, Civil's price would then be $7,983,000. Metra's price would be $7,707,967. So that goes to show that when you unbalance prices from one item to another, you're playing roulette if you're a bidder. Happens all the time. And in that case, I think it's within the sound discretion of the Baltimore City whether or not they're going to award the contract under those circumstances. Thank you.
No, thank you. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, if one person from Metro can speak on behalf of the next question I'm going to ask. We have WC 1275 on Caroline Street. We have 1252 on Grantley Road. We also have 1410. It's urgent need water infrastructure rehabilitation and improvement, phase 1, fiscal year 21. If someone from Metro can speak, I believe you protested all of these items. Is the posture in which you presented to this board today the same on the other two subsequent items, that you have not had a chance to respond specifically to information that you have to show that you are the most responsive and responsible bidder?
President,
I mean,
I think that
if they're materially different, that's fine. But if they're not, I just want to know right now before we decide to proceed on this item.
I do believe that the items or the arguments that would be raised with regard to these are in many instances similar, but there are some nuances and some different arguments as well with regard to those specific contracts. President Mosby.
Understood. So I'm going to present to the board today that we defer these three items. We give Metro one meeting to come back with all the information that they say that they have specific to any issues. Then we proceed from there. Are there any concerns with taking that approach? And I'm going to say that for this item and the next two, that way it provides full transparency. I think there was a lot of things that were talked about at the beginning of this that I know that folks in DPW administration strive to ensure that we have full transparency. I think it makes sense that we just give them one additional meeting to come back, provide us with any detailed information. I think DPW did an amazing job through Deputy General Counsel Maxwell, as well as General Counsel Ingram, of providing the city's strong position. Now just give them an opportunity to kind of provide any additional feedback. So with that, I'm going to just call it, we defer these items to the next meeting. We'll take the three items up on the next meeting and we'll proceed from there. At this point, I don't think that we need to hear anything else from Metro. I believe that this board has been extremely fair and providing you an opportunity to state your case and your position. And I think the fact that we're going to not take up a position today to provide you to come up with additional information that we can go from there. So with that, we're going to move on to the last item.
Thank you, President Mosby.
No, thank you, guys.
Mosby.
The final item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 183, Department of Finance Master Service Agreement. This request is in the amount of $96,760 to enter into a master service agreement with the Paymentus Corporation to provide full-featured electronic billing and payment solution. A protest was received by Kutuk Rock LLP. Representative for ACI Payments Incorporated in response to protest was also received from DLA Piper, representing Paymentus Corporation. On behalf of Finance Department, we have on the call Director Henry Raymond to walk us through the request. Director Raymond, the floor is yours.
Good morning, President Mosby, Mayor Scott, Controller Henry, honorable board members. I'm Henry Raymond, Director of Finance. First, I would like to clearly state that as it relates to this protest, there were no procurement violations related to this master services agreement. Secondly, there was nothing improper or arbitrary with the designation as a professional services agreement. The Department of Finance's award recommendation complies with all applicable laws and regulations. The master services agreement is the product of public notice and information submitted from 13 vendors. All vendors had the exact same opportunity to provide information. No formal advertising is required for professional services agreements. Payment system services such as this online billing system clearly falls within the city's definition of professional services. And that language is services that are predominantly mental or intellectual rather than physical or manual, and require the application of special knowledge, technical skill, and the experience that comes from instruction, training, and the exercise of mental faculties. So again, there were no procurement violations associated with this recommendation, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or concerns from the board at this time? This is an issue that came up at our last meeting. I think not only from the Department of Finance, but also from the City Solicitor's Office. They've been extremely responsive in providing back information to members of the board with concerns. Mayor Scott, I know you'll be happy to kind of know that, but they've been extremely responsive in ensuring that they ascertain the correct information. I do see the hand raised of Director Carter from BSIT. Director Carter, if you would like to talk on behalf of this item.
Thank you, President Mosley and members of the board. I'd just like to add to what Director Raymond mentioned earlier when we thought about the scope of this effort, which is the broad scope of a payment system across all of Baltimore City that's forward-facing. We submitted in BSIT the actual request for a professional services agreement, which go to the Director Raymond and the Finance Department, as well as the Comptroller for approval. And once we got approval for that actual request, we began to work with Paymentus because they had the best fit for Baltimore City moving forward. But we followed all of the regulations relative to the request for professional services, recognizing that given the scope of this effort, we knew we needed the consultancy that would give us the knowledge, the expertise, and the technical skills for this broad effort across all of Baltimore City. So I just wanted to add that, sir.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And I just want to be clear, based off the description, it says to provide full-featured electronic billing and payment solution. So to be clear, that's more than just them providing consultation or professional services. Well, let's throw the term professional services out. Consultation, that's them actually implementing a full-fledged electronic system and then, I guess, operating it or providing that full scale of operation for the city to utilize that system that they've developed. Is that accurate?
No, I'll address that. There is nothing in the regulation that limits the consulting services to
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think we kind of went over that before. I'm just saying, I just want to understand on the surface of what we're doing here. This is not them just providing consultation. This is them providing a full-fledged a system that will be used on an ongoing basis by this company, right? So I think that is kind of the hiccup. I know the legalese associated with the charter language and what we kind of talked about. I think we're here to try to perfect that more and more. So I just want to know, for my benefit moving forward, for a software or for a database or for a system of this magnitude, from an ongoing perspective, I think the city, through the comptroller's office, the finance department has determined that this is considered professional services based off of the way the charter is currently written. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
But into that same point, this is a full-fledged implementation of a system that will be in operation, that will be ongoing, that someone could, I guess, assume is not necessarily quote unquote consultation or professional services. I guess that's the way I'm kind of landing on this issue.
Well, where I'm leaning is this is clearly in compliance with all applicable regulations related to the professional services agreement designation.
Understood. So maybe we need to work on that. Office of Comptroller, I see Mr. James Knighton, your hand's raised. If you would like to speak on behalf of this item at this point.
Yes, good morning, Mr. President and members of the board. Just to add on to what Director Raymond said, for the record, James Knighton, Director of Policy in the Comptroller's Office and the Comptroller's designee for determining professional services agreements. Director Raymond and I did receive the request from BSIT to designate these services for procurement under a professional services agreement, which is part of the process set forth by the board in its 2019 resolution relating to non-architectural engineering and professional services agreements. The services were described as technical consulting needed to integrate an electronic bill paying system with the city's broader IT systems. And so it was on that basis, as Director Raymond said, that I concurred in that initial designation.
Yeah, and I guess, Mr. Knighton, that's where I understand what you guys approved and what you saw and what we keep hearing, but I think this goes far beyond technical consultation. This is an actual implementation of a full-fledged system that will be used ongoing for very important services and reasons for the citizens of Baltimore. I see that far past the idea of what anybody could ascertain the word technical consultation means. I realize that that's what you approved and that's kind of what's written up. I just don't necessarily see it as just being technical consultation. I do see that hands. Is there any questions or concerns from other members of the board with finance, comptroller's office, or anyone else? Hearing and seeing none, if there is a protester assigned, I would like to recognize lead representative, Mrs. Jennifer Blunt of Katak Rock to speak on behalf of this protest. Ms. Blunt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Mosby. Good afternoon, or good morning still. Mayor Scott, Comptroller Henry, and other distinguished members of the board. I am here today on behalf of ACI. I also have with me Mr. Steve Surratt with my firm, who is going to be speaking on behalf of ACI, and we also have Mr. Chris Schwantz and Mr. Paul Fitzgerald from ACI.
So Ms. Blunt, before you continue, are you going to be the main speaker of the day as it relates to the protest?
No, and I apologize for my long-winded introduction. I'll turn
it over to Mr. Surratt. Who should come on first?
Mr. Surratt, Steve Surratt.
Okay, Mr. Surratt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President Mosby and board. I think you've done a very good job to encapsulate the issue at hand here, which is initially we thought that we were protesting on the basis of an award coming from an RFI, which, as you know, is not a procurement action under the rules. And there were 13 respondents to the RFI. ACI was not, because it was not considered to be a procurement action. Once we met with the Board of Estimates about a month ago, we learned for the first time that actually the RFI was not the basis, but instead there was a characterization of this work being professional services. ACI has been the incumbent contractor for the city going back at least 10 years. And with a good, strong track record, ACI stands ready, willing, and able to compete on a level playing field with anybody. We are the oldest and largest professional company doing this type of work, electronic payment work throughout the country at the federal, state, and local levels. So we do not shy from competition. You are correct when we looked at the RFI that this essentially is a replacement of the ACI contract. And the ACI contract is by far and large implementation. It's as if you had clerical people behind the scenes processing payments. It's done electronically, and that's the way it occurs. There is a modest amount, I would say de minimis amount of setup work that has to occur, which does require some expertise. But by far and large, overwhelmingly, this is just automatic electronic processing of payments. Now, when you take a look at the actual definition of professional services, not only by the city, but across the country, there's GAO case law on this, Court of Federal Claims case law on this, state and local case law on this. Professional services is meant to be essentially consulting in nature. You're buying expertise. Here, that's not what the city's buying. To the extent that it is, it's work really done by the contractor internally for its own purposes. So in our brief, we analogize to a construction contractor who has an internal CPA that does the books for the company, but you can't characterize that entire construction contract as professional services. So we asked that we don't allow in this situation this modest exception against the rules of fair and open competition for professional services to swallow the general rule, which is that whenever possible, you should go through a formal public solicitation process, allow the chips fall where they may, and we'll take the result one way or the other going through a fair process. But here, this we don't think was transparent or fair to ACI or to the taxpayers. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for your detailed and concise explanation of your concerns. At the moment, are there any other members from the protester that would like to speak on behalf of this item? Now I see Mr. Paul Traversi, hand raised. Are you with, you're not with the protester? Yeah, I'm sorry, you're on mute, sir. Mr. Traversi, you're on mute.
Mr. President, no, I'm happy to be on the winning team Paymentus and would love to respond when you think it's appropriate. Thank you, sir.
No, thank you so much. At this point, are there any, I see the hand raised of our Comptroller, Comptroller Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just had one question for Mr. Surratt, which was, did ACI respond to the RFI when it learned about it?
Well, when I learned about it, it was in December. So no, it did not respond when the RFI was issued. And by the time we learned about it, it was too late.
Well,
but again,
no, but the reason I ask is because when this issue was before the board previously, you had asked also for more time to compete. And so when you learned about this in December, which is now 2+ months ago, why didn't you respond to the RFI so that you could conceivably make the case that you should be competing?
Well, again, the RFI is a request for information. And a request for information is just that. It's a market survey being done by the city to figure out what's out there in the landscape of potential offerors. ACI is the incumbent. It's been the incumbent for the city for 10 years, so you certainly knew who we were. Second is, it wasn't an RFP, so therefore it never asked for us to submit an offer. And then third, by the time we learned about the RFI, it had already opened and closed. So there was no reason for us to do anything with the RFI because it was basically water over the dam at that point.
So basically you're saying that the city already knew everything it needed to know about you and your company when it made the decision that it should be looking for something else?
No, if the city wanted to go through the formal solicitation process under the procurement rules, the city certainly knew how to reach us. And had it issued an RFP, we certainly would have responded.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, I'll allow Mr. Paul Bursey to speak on behalf of Paymentus.
Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Mayor, Mr. Solicitor, Mr. Comptroller, and Director. It's an honor to be before you. I'm Paul Taberzi. I'm sitting in my Baltimore office at the Piper Law Firm, and we're very proud to represent the winning bidder, Paymentus, a wonderful national company that did compete with 13 other companies, won the bid. We're very pleased to be able to serve the city of Baltimore if the board approves this, and we respectfully ask you to. Frankly, the bottom line is the solicitor's office got it right on the law. We've looked at that. I've got with me one of my colleagues who's a national procurement expert. We've looked at it. We believe the solicitor got it exactly right on the law. We believe the director of finance and his team got it right in picking us. And we would be a lower cost solution, a better solution, and more convenient for the citizens of Baltimore and all the other folks who pay their bills. So we're very, very happy to be the winning bidder, and we look forward to our partnership. Mr. President, could I call on my colleague to speak briefly in response to the legal point, and then the Chief Commercial Officer of Paymentus, Jerry Portocalis, briefly, if you would allow it?
Very briefly, yes.
Yes, sir. Ryan, why don't you jump in? This is my colleague, Ryan Carpenter, who's an expert on procurement.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning to everyone, members of the board, Mr. President. As Paul just summarized, the city got this 100% correct. The decision to move forward with an informal solicitation as opposed to a formal solicitation, as based on the conclusion that these services constitute professional services, fall squarely within the regulatory definition, the definition begins by stating that which it is not, and that's not manual or physical in nature. Rather, all the definition requires is that the services require application of special knowledge, technical skill, experience that comes from instruction, training, and exercise of mental faculties. Now, I think the protester has gone to great lengths to try to focus the attention thus far to other aspects of the regulations other than the definition, such as the illustrative list or perhaps the de facto list. But I don't want to get bogged down in other aspects of the regulation. I think we should focus at the definition. And the definition of professional services here is not peculiar in relation to other procurement laws around the country, states, localities, cities, in that it affords government officials a great deal of discretion in deriving best value from the services that they buy on behalf of the taxpayer. And the notion that the professional services are merely ancillary, or I think it's been described as de minimis, I think misses the point. Under that analysis, the software engineers and the software architects at Google would be considered akin to mail carriers, because 50 years ago, our correspondence would have been physically carried from address to address. But that conclusion is absurd. Technology progresses, though the means by which we perform tasks changes and necessarily requires more complex and more complicated professional services in order to bring those to bear. And so the notion that these software engineers and architects are not professional services because 50 years ago they would have been performed by mail clerks or payment clerks. That's not quite the right analysis. When in doubt, look at the definition. And the definition here provides the city officials with a great deal of discretion, and their decision to move forward under the informal solicitation process is more than reasonable. And in fact, they went a great deal further than required. I think they should be commended by actually going through the RFI process and a lengthy negotiation and product demonstration process with 13 competitors. The final point that I want to touch on is this is sort of a common protest theme that we see in public procurement, in that we appear to have an incumbent that rested on its laurels a little bit and did not monitor the government website as it was obligated to do so. And instead of monitoring the government entry point for those business opportunities and compete on an
Mr.
informal
Carpenter,
basis.
can you just focus on payment to and not the motivation of any of the other competitors? I really,
Yes, sir.
you guys, I think that probably keeps us in line of them talking about you talking about them. We do a pretty good job here of stop that. I know that you were going down a path and a rightful path, so I get it. So I'm not trying to admonish you, but I think we just have a really good technical and sound argument of your position and their position that we can kind of go off of.
Absolutely, Mr. President. In brief, the city's decision and analysis is directly on point and well within the discretion afforded to it under the procurement regulations. I'm more than happy to field additional questions on this point.
And Mr. President, I'd love to call on Jerry Portocalis, Chief Commercial Officer, to say thank you and answer any questions and to speak briefly. And we're very, very happy to be, if the board approves us, to be the city's partner on this. Jerry?
Yes, good morning, members of the board. Mr. President, thank you so much for having us and giving us the opportunity to speak this morning. The most important assets that the city serves is its citizens, as well as the funds and bills that are being paid, and we take that responsibility very, very importantly and very seriously. And we have, as has been already discussed, take this very seriously by having professionals that are experienced and have the wherewithal to bring a enterprise solution to bear, whereby the systems are tied in with and given the city all the tools that it needs. So we look forward to bringing some new payment options to the city at a lower price. These newer payment options would include the very popular, very modern, and payment options that your citizens are interested in, which include PayPal, Venmo, Amazon Pay, Apple Pay, Google Pay, while at the same time doing so at a lower cost. With that being said, we are very pleased and looking forward to serving you and your citizens.
Thank you so much.
President, thank you for hearing from us, sir, and members of the board. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think it seems exciting when we move in the direction of innovation. I know through the amazing leadership of our mayor, as well as Todd Carter at BSIT, that's been the intention of this contract, this bid and this proposal. Obviously we've gotten hung up on this professional services thing and some concerns around that. What I will say also to the board is I would like to defer this one more week, one more meeting, to allow for ACI to know the information that was presented today and come back with just one final presentation to the board. I think that's fully transparent. They know exactly where we're coming from and what has been stated. It gives them an opportunity to focus specifically on any questions or concerns. As I've stated at the beginning of this, the administration has been extremely responsive to the concerns that were raised at the first hearing on this. This will be the second hearing. My full expectation is that the board will vote this either way on the third hearing, but I would like to provide ACI a formal opportunity to just document any of the major concerns or questions that they might have moving forward. With that, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, there is no new business before the board. We will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. As a reminder, the Board of Estimates has adopted a bi-weekly meeting schedule for 2022 and will reconvene on Wednesday, March the 16th at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in.
Mr. President?
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Ms. Comptroller?
Yeah, we are not reconvening at 12 noon.
Because we moved to electronic.
Well, yes, we're in the process of moving.
Well, to the subject matter expert for the city of Baltimore, could you just quickly explain that to all the listeners out there?
We are currently in a process of transitioning to electronic bidding that may or may not be interrupted by a return to in-person public meetings of the board. If that were to occur before we actually finish the electronic bidding system. But what we are doing now is we are posting the bid results online after they have been opened at noon.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm sorry, I hear someone.
Yeah, it's Robert DeShield. I wanted to be recognized because
you had your hand raised, Mr. DeShield?
Yeah, I did.
I apologize. What bid were you looking to?
I was trying to find out. I was trying to find out what happened to 1410 because Metro wasn't the low bidder on that one. And I think you lumped it in with the other two without giving us a chance to speak.
Because it seemed like it was in the same direction. If you want us to recall that, we will specifically for you and hear it today. But I thought I was going to provide you the same opportunity to provide the specifics to this board. I realized that you were here for R.E. Harrington, I believe. Is that right?
That is correct. But our protest has nothing to do with unbalanced bids, and Metro wasn't the low bidder.
Well, since you appropriately protested and we're here, we will hear this right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
So there we go. So before we adjourn, I appreciate you for bringing that up. Before we adjourn, we're going to go to WC 1410. This item can be found on page 181 through 182. Items number 3 and number 4, Department of Public Works, WC 1410, urgent need for water infrastructure rehabilitation and improvement phase 1 for fiscal year 21. There are 2 protests for this item. A supplemental protest was received from Metra Industries. Additionally, a protest was received from R.E. Harrington Plumbing and Heating Incorporated. Once again, DPW has Deputy General Counsel Janine Maxwell to speak on behalf of this particular item.
Yes, Mr. City Council President, I should start by saying
Excuse me, Mr. President. Mr. President.
Yeah, you're talking about TV 25, Comptroller?
No, I was trying to say the mayor's been having his hand up for
I'm sorry.
Trying to get your attention.
Your yellow hand is blending in with the CIAA. That's why I totally missed you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Mary, you have a question or concern?
No, I'll raise my concern after my question after Mr. DeShield speaks.
All right. I'm also hearing, guys, that we're having a technical issue with TV 25.
It's on, Mr. President. I see it on. It's on. I have it on.
But I think that they're concerned that the feed is about to cut out. TV 25 is contacting us now. They're having an issue.
Yeah, one station. Yep.
Did it go out?
No.
So I think in the interest of
It's gone now.
Yeah.
I would just say that I would just respectfully request that we hold until next week.
Yeah, in the interest of full transparency to the public, Mr. DeShield, I'm sorry I skipped over that earlier. I just thought that providing the additional week and us hearing everything at once was going to be the best from a timing perspective. I realize that you're here, but I'd assume that you would also jump back on at the subsequent meeting. But in the interest of just full transparency, TV 25 is really important to the citizenry so they can participate in these hearings. I think it's probably best that we just hold off again on 1410. We'll bring it back up. I promise to do it at the top of the next agenda. in 2 weeks, and we'll go from there. But I think that that's just best so everybody's on the same page.
I appreciate that, Mr. President. Thank you.
And again, I'm so sorry, Mr. DeShields. You have never been known to be quiet. So in the future, if that's happened, I will not be upset if you cut me off and say, hey, you just decided to skip over 1410 and I have a different point. Okay?
I'm trying to mellow out some, but it's not working.
All right.
I'll
Well,
see you in 2 weeks.
yeah. So to everybody, again, we're going to close out. There's no new business before the desk. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're on a line, no one's on TV 25 at this point, or you're actually on the bridge. But Baltimore, we absolutely love you. That's why we're trying to provide you with this fully transparent process here at your Board of Estimates. Thank you.